Minister, thank you very much indeed.
This was intended as a blue-collar conference that had to deliver practical results on the road to Copenhagen, and it has. As the Minister indicated, we've got our work program for next year agreed, and it's going to lead to intensified negotiations. We've managed to launch the Adaptation Fund, which is of critical importance to developing countries.
You spoke about, over the last year, it's been about developing good atmosphere.
We've made progress, important progress, on reducing emissions from deforestation. And I also believe that this conference has been important in pushing the EU package on climate and energy forward.
Sized. Would you agree with that? And what's got to be done to cut it down?
It must also be said that this conference caused some bitterness in that it proved to be impossible to raise additional resources for adaptation. And that I see as another kind of change in mood on the road to Copenhagen. What this conference has very clearly showed is that from now on, it's for real in this process, that countries are getting down to serious negotiations.
The final day of this conference shows us that there's a long way to Copenhagen. I think we have seen the same problems in this conference that we've seen all of this year in the negotiations, which is that there's a gap, a divide between the rich countries and the developing countries. That gap came out in a lot of anger and frustration in the last closing plenary, where the developing countries were complaining that they hadn't moved forward on the financing issue. And that is a real problem and needs to be solved in 2009. It's because they believe that this will cost and they think it costs enough. The arguments for developing countries who were criticizing the results of this conference were that they didn't feel that they got any new money for adaptation purposes. And we know that there is far too little money out there for adaptation, for dealing with climate change problems in the poorest countries, for the poorest people who get flooded or who are suffering from droughts or other things. And they were frustrated that they didn't get any security for additional funding, new money for those purposes. And that is one thing they should have had in this conference, but now it's taken into the discussion next year, so it will be yet one more thing that we also need to deal with on the road to Copenhagen. It's become longer.